Welcome, one and all, to episode number 32. That's 3-2 of the Creative Outlet Podcast. My name is Brandon, and the person who is recording with me is named...
This is Boom, a.k.a. Tyler, a.k.a. I don't know. I don't have enough time to be on the show and have more nicknames than appearances, so...
Well, you know, this is only your third time on, so we can address that issue as time goes on. Although, you know, I'm be honest, I don't know if it's really an issue. It's really just like a creative kind of thing, I suppose.
Well, you know what they say. Third time's a charm, which means this episode should be our best.
Yes, yeah, we're right. You'd certainly hope so. After we've done all this, well, because we had practice, and then we had 2 episodes, so it's like you'd think things would improve as time goes on. It seems to be the trend with most things, but...
that is the hope.
You never know. Today is January 17th. It is yet another Friday in 2025. And we have some topics to talk about today, because after all, this is a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, first, yeah, we haven't had much time to talk. Is there anything that's been going on for you lately? Things that have caught your eye in life? Things you're playing? Stuff like that?
I beat Bioshock for the first time that I should have done probably like 15, 20 years ago, but I did finally beat it.
Wow. And is that a particularly long game? I've heard it's like, you know, obviously people like talk very highly of it, but I don't know a ton about it other than it being like, isn't it the game where you can have like, where you can like shoot bees from your hands?
I mean, it is a choice you can do, yes. So I wouldn't go out of my way to say it's like a long game. I beat it in 3 days, but I also did some pretty longer gaming sessions than I'm usually doing, like nowadays. But it was like, I think in total, maybe about 15 hours, like with pauses and stuff too. So it wasn't like a super long game. It was just one of those games that like I started it as a kid. I shouldn't say kid, but like when I was either in like late high school or early college, I got a 360. And that was one of the games that I got, and I wanted to play it. I got to like probably about 70% through the game, and I never went back to it. And I just completely forgot of everything that was going on. I got to like the quote unquote twist that's like the big thing from the game. And I'm not going to spoil that here just because that's like something that I feel like every gamer, if they're going to play this game, should experience firsthand. It's a wonderful twist by far, and is still, I think, in a lot of cases unrivaled when it comes to like storytelling. But I got to the twist, and then I just never got around to finishing. And I was, you know, it was maybe like earlier this month I realized, I'm like, oh, I haven't finished Bioshock yet. And I saw it was like on sale on Steam. So I bought it, and then I just kind of powered through it, and yeah. So now I have to go through 2 and Infinite yet at some point, but I have at least finally beaten the first one.
You were so taken aback by how amazing the twist was that you just couldn't finish it until 15 years later.
No, that definitely wasn't it. That was definitely not it.
Well, play with me here. That's what I'm trying to, you know, make a joke here.
It was more, I think, just the fact that it was like at the time. I think it was this was in college, so I got busy with probably it was like just exams and stuff at the time, and I just never bothered to go pick it back up because I think around that time was right when also like Nintendo was getting pretty heavy with a lot of my time with a lot of the games. I was very big into League of Legends at the time, so like it just kind of fell to the wayside. And then nowadays, like I prefer playing more like solo games or story-driven games, with like the exception right now of Marvel Rivals. And I just finally put the time into it. It was a fun time. I still love the hilarity of the, as I call it, the 1-2 punch, which is you get your first plasmid at the beginning, which is a lightning bolt one, and you get your first melee weapon, which is a wrench. And you can legitimately beat a majority of the enemies with that combo. It's literally shock, smack, that's it. And they're usually out by that point.
Well, and if you really just want to play it for the story, there's nothing wrong with going with the so-called cheesy way of getting your way through the game.
Right, and there's not really a wrong way to play per se, because like all of the enemies still take damage regardless of what it is that they are being hit by, whether it's with bullets, with melee weapons, with the plasmids, whatever it is, it's still going to do damage of some type to them. The nice thing that I did learn, I didn't even realize this was a thing, but apparently there are level ups to the plasmids as well too, because I think I finished with like a level 3 lightning bolt as one of them, and it was just like that thing was just putting in the work at a certain point where I'm like, all right, we're good, we're good. What's cool about the combat in it that I loved was the fact that there is some semblance of realism to it when it comes to like like properties of it, if that makes sense. If you take a lightning bolt plasmid and you shoot it into a thing of water, it will electrocute enemies. Like that is really cool attention to detail. And this is from like probably what, the 2010s, if that.
It might have
So
been a
like
little bit earlier, because I thought Infinite was sometime in the early 2010s.
Infinite, if I remember, was like when I was like nearing the end of college. So yeah, you might be right. But like the fact that like this was like a really early 360 game was still really impressive in the case of, oh, we're gonna still be able to do some semblance of realism. It's like things catch on fire if they go through fire, or enemies get electrocuted because you shocked the water, or like there's a wire that falls into the like puddle or something. That's really impressive detail for like the time. I had this entire feeling of uneasiness when I played it because the entire time I'm sitting there and I do not know what's going to come around the corner. I don't know what I'm going to look at next, and I don't know when I'm going to run into like the big daddies or any of those. And I'm like, great. I hate where I am right now. It was really well done. Pacing by today's standards might have been a little bit slower, but like it still worked for what it was. I'm not gonna like nitpick super hard on a lot of the things in it. It's still a really good game that I feel like people should play. I have heard bad things about the remaster though, but apparently if you buy it on Steam, you get both the original and the remaster. So it's not like you're unable to play one or the other. You get to play both if you really feel like it. Kind of like the OG Borderlands on Steam. There's like a regular version, there's also a Game of the Year version. So really kind of comes down to like how purist I guess you want to go. Because I know a lot of people, like when it first got released, the remaster got released, there were a lot of people that got mad about a specific voice change because the guy who effectively is like your Jiminy Cricket voice, as I call him, Atlas, he has this like really thick Irish accent, and everybody loved it because it was so out there at the time. It was very different, so people really attached to it when they first played the game. Remaster comes along and they made him much more American sounding, and everybody was like all up in arms about it because I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, y'all are really picky about a voice actor, not realizing the difference in this. But it's still like I understand it to a degree. People get attached, but especially like a character that they really resonate with, you know?
Well, right, and there's a similar thing, kind of thinking back to our previous episode. They did the same thing with the Steam version of all the Sam and Max remasters. You can either play the original one or you can play the new one, and the same kind of thing. It was all because of a voice actor. Although I think that's one where people were definitely more split because it was around the character of Bosco. Because in the original, he's played by a white guy. In the remaster, they recast him because, he's a black character. So he's played by, a black guy. And, I like both voices for him. I'm not really like one is better than the other, but I can totally see where anyone comes into this and it's like just like you've known this voice for years that you get attached to it. But there's also certainly something to be said too for like, yeah, it kind of looks bad to have a black character played by a white guy. Even with the context, there are times where that can look bad. Although obviously there are times with the context where it's like it isn't as bad as others. But as with everything in life, it's complicated.
Right. And I think the big thing too is there are a lot of this is becoming this could have been its own topic, but I'll try to keep it to this last point while it's fresh in my head. There are voice actors that become problematic where they will replace them. I think Fire Emblem Three Houses had that actually, if I remember. I could be wrong,
Yep.
but
I
the
remember
voice,
what you're talking about.
yeah, because I think the male Byleth voice actor actually got into like legal trouble, like for I want to say it was like grooming or something like that. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on this. I just remember him being like a problem at some point that they had to replace him almost flat out, or they like took his voice lines out or something. So I get it. Sometimes it's a necessary thing to do, which is unfortunate, especially like if the game is like taken out. Like another example I know of is like the whole completionist thing that happened last year. There was an appearance of him in Sea of Stars where he was supposed to play a merchant, and they actually took him out and just replaced him as a different character after the whole charity scandal thing that he did. But I do not have the time or the tequila to go into that one. There are way better people on YouTube who have talked about this in much greater detail that will do it justice better than I can. Short version is basically he had all this money collected for charity and none of it went to charity. It was just sitting in an account basically for like a decade.
Allegedly for the lawyers, because I don't think that there have been any
Allegedly,
convictions yet.
sorry.
But
I don't
yeah, I
think there's.
mean,
I don't know how much of it's going to be convictions, if I'm being honest, but that's not the point we're talking about here. It
sure.
was just Sea of Stars had to take him out, but it was a lot easier when it's an appearance of a 2D character versus a full-on voice actor. But I get that.
Right.
I definitely understand that.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the first time that this has happened, but it's just like these things happen, and you know that's how it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that I wanted to talk about, so I noted today is January 17th, 2025. That means yesterday was Thursday, January 16th, 2025. And something happened yesterday that I think...
The of the crowd as an entire trailer is unveiled for the Switch 2.
Yes. So, I am laying in bed yesterday morning, and my eyes open up for the first time. It's like 7:45. And usually what I do after that is I go right back to sleep, or I try to go back to sleep, because Brandon doesn't like being up that early, especially when he has to usually be up very late. Not as late as you are, for a certain reason, but, I have to be up relatively late in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But I make the mistake, not that I haven't done this before, but, I make the mistake of, well, let's take a look at the old cell phone. And I go to one of my favorite websites that I've mentioned on this podcast many times before, although it's got some problems. That's a topic for another day. Good old NintendoLife.com. And I see the headline, Nintendo Switch 2 reveal trailer gives first official look at the new console. And I want to keep this relatively brief because in some ways this is actually going to lead into, I've got a whole bank of topics. I'm kind of been surprised with how much stuff that I've had like banked over the last year of stuff that I wanted to talk about. But it kind of parlays easily into what I want to talk about next week, which is leaks. Leaks make everything so boring. Because I should have, yesterday morning when I saw this trailer, it should have given me an instant bolt and jolt of energy. And instead, I was like, I'll look at this later, I'm tired. Because, and this is nothing wrong with the trailer. There are people who've been leaking stuff along the way, and it's like, I feel like I know everything about this already. Oh, it looks like a Switch. It's all black, which I will say that's something that I like because all of my systems that like have the option to come in black, I've gotten in black the first time. So the fact that like the Joy-Cons and all this, like to me, it looks nice, it looks sleek, it makes me happy. I'm interested in all the stuff that all the other people are interested in. What's this mystery button under the home button? I want to know. They only revealed a brand new Mario Kart in it. So like, I want to know more about that, right? Again, I'll go into more detail on this next time, or who knows? Maybe this really is all I have to say, but like, man, I just like, I'm not as bad as Hideki Kamiya. That was another article I saw last night. Oh, he is not happy with leakers. You should have seen what he wrote about this, because it was like, whoo, it was scathing.
Okay, well, do you want to make this the topic? Because I'm looking at a rundown for what we're planning to talk about, and I'm kind of laughing because I'm like, I think we know what we're talking about, and it is not what is written on the list right now.
No, it's not written. It is not what's written on the list right now. I just have figured this happened yesterday. We're kind of obligated to talk about it, and we don't really know much. So it's like we're gonna go. Like there is a whole Nintendo Direct planned for this on April 2nd. So we'll need to.
Basically, the only things that I got out of it was we're getting a new Mario Kart.
Yep.
which apparently everyone is already calling that it's going to have like 24 player capacities for a race, which I'm shocked by if that's doable, but if it is, cool. If
Yeah,
not,
I mean, I'm curious. I
yeah,
maybe it'll be like a mode because I mean, 8-player
I think
Smash is
so.
a mode in Smash Brothers, but
Oh yeah.
the standard
That's
is still to do like 4 tops.
right, but I think it's like a normal race, if I remember right, is like 12, I think. Maybe 16. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's 12.
It was 8 until Wii. Then we
Yeah.
had 12, 7 because it was on the 3DS went back to 8, and then in Mario Kart 8 it went to 12 yet again.
Yeah. So, like, that part I'm excited about. And then the other half of it was backward compatibility, which already has me ready to buy it immediately. Because here's the thing, I have an unhealthy amount of Switch games, and I say that word specifically because I have so many Switch games. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish through all of them in my lifetime. I hope I can. But realistically, it's like I have so many Switch games. Like, I'm absolutely stoked at the fact of how many Switch games I have and that I get to actually experience it. The issue I wonder about is what about the games that struggled on the Switch? Will they be better performing on that? Say Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the big one. Will they have like a better time on the Switch too? Or is it going to be, it will still be Switch quality because of reasons? That's the one that I'm kind of wondering about because if there's a significant improvement in that, I'm willing to bet money Scarlet and Violet is going to see a huge bump in amount of people who play it.
Yeah, and that's something they didn't talk about in there, but I agree it's something that I'm interested in knowing.
Yeah.
I would hope because I'm thinking back, you had the Wii U, right? The Wii U had Wii Mode, which was basically just
Mm-hmm.
like we're gonna turn on a Wii inside of the Wii U, and you didn't really see an improvement. And actually, in some ways, you saw some downgrades for some Wii games when you ran them on a Wii U. But I would
Mm-hmm.
think it seems like in general, the trend has been like the new piece of technology, like the PS5 and the PS4, are relatively similar. Like obviously, the PS5 is much more powerful than the PS4, but like architecturally, getting into stuff that I don't know anything about, but I'm going to pontificate on anyway. They're
Mm-hmm.
relatively similar. So then you can get those upgrades in terms of like how the game looks. So I would think there'd be something similar here, but we don't know for sure yet. But I think it's also well known that it's like people have talked about for a long time. Like we'd like to see improvements on these games on better hardware. And instead, all we got was the OLED switch, which is fine, but I think people would have rather seen something that's like an incremental upgrade along the way. So it's like, I think they know, or at least I'd hope to God they know that there's a demand for it. It's just a matter of whether or not they execute.
Right. And for me, like the Pokemon games that we got as of late, like Scarlet and Violet and Arceus, I genuinely love Arceus with a passion. It is probably my favorite Pokemon game of all time now. But it also suffers the same problem where it's very graphically underwhelming. And I know graphics aren't everything when it comes to a game. I don't want to make it sound like I'm one of those guys. But I do feel that it would have been better if it was on a system that had a little bit more juice to it. The rumors coming out with it were like, I think Switch 2 should have the same capabilities of power like a PS4, which by a standard of Nintendo games are going to look like they're in Unreal 5 or something like that. But like by comparison, I just would love to see a little bit more of a graphical improvement with those types of games that you want like this massive map. When we literally see, I'm trying to make sure that I word this right, so I don't want to make it get construed. When we have these like big open world games like Pokemon, Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet, where it clearly has like the grandiose and like the ability that it can be this really wonderful marvel visually. But also in the same breath, you pull up something like Horizon Zero Dawn, a game that I genuinely love on the PS4, and it also does similar things to what Scarlet and Violet did. I don't know how much of it you really know on Zero Dawn at all, or any of the Horizon games for that matter. The first game, at least, and I assume the sequel did too. I haven't gotten a chance to play the sequel yet. They did something really smart with how they were able to kind of get around the graphical limitations for Zero Dawn where basically they had it where everything that your character is seeing in front of you is rendered. Everything behind you that you cannot see basically doesn't exist at the time. As you look around, it essentially just reloads at everything. So like it's there but it's not there. And you're able to actually see everything in really good graphical detail of whatever is in front of you because it's making sure that it's easing up on the processing power that it takes to load that entire world in. And it just gives you, here's what you can see. There's no point in showing you and putting all this effort into the stuff behind you because you can't see it. It's a third person game.
Right. Well,
So,
and I would think they'd already be doing something like that. After all, it's been, a standard for years and years and years and years already that, like, similarly, we're going to intentionally use a worse texture on an object that's way out in the distance because that takes a lot less processing power to be able to see. It just doesn't pay to put the higher quality texture on there when it's going to be so small and far away. So I think they're doing strategies like that. But
right,
there
and
does.
Scarlet and Violet, from what I understand, they did a similar thing like Horizon Zero Dawn did, where it was, we're going to load things that you can see without putting all the stuff behind you up and already there, because then it's going to chug like a freight train.
Right, but
But
there just comes a point where it's like the hardware just constrains you, and
yes,
that's
and
fine. But that's
I
just
think
what it is.
right, and that's what I'm getting at. Is it's like you look at it from like the perspective of like a Switch doing it versus a PS4 doing it. A PS4 has much more computing power to do that at a much more reliable level than I think a Switch ever was going to. It's not saying like it's inherently bad that they did it. It did probably help it overall. Scarlet and Violet probably could have been Switch 2 games, and it probably would have been more well received if it had that little bit of extra time in the oven to be able to make sure that the console can actually hold it all together. That was the thing I think with Scarlet and Violet that like a lot of people didn't like, was that it was like, things kept popping in and out. It was like it wasn't as simple as like, oh, this is all happening here, 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 here. It's like no, it's like all still getting loaded even if I'm running toward like the thing, but it's a Switch. It's gonna have problems computing a lot of that stuff.
Right, and I think you'd hope you'd see something like you'd see an improvement in that sense when you get to like Pokemon Legends ZA, and who knows what they're planning yet with Metroid Prime 4. But you'd think like, okay, maybe there should be a version of Metroid Prime 4 that's more optimized for the Switch 2. And you'll basically do like a Breath of the Wild on the Wii U and the Switch situation for that too.
But yeah, I am very excited for the Switch 2. I hope that it succeeds because I would love to buck the trend of one console does really well, one does mediocre or poorly, and then goes back up on this like effective roller coaster of situations. I hope the Switch 2 does really well. I want Nintendo to succeed with this one because I think this is a overall a much better console. I don't know how many people will buy it right away. I think what's going to end up happening is there will be like a slow stopping point of like they'll release games maybe both on Switch and Switch 2, but then they'll start gradually getting to the point of like, okay, you got to get a Switch 2 now because the games we're making are going to be much more elaborate than what we've been putting on. It's not saying you have to get rid of your Switch games. It's just saying you have to upgrade your Switch at minimum.
That's what I'm saying. Pokemon Legends, Metroid Prime 4, those are definitely going to be Switch games. But new Mario Kart, that's going to be a Switch 2 game. There's no way that's going to be an original
Hell,
Switch
I
game.
mean, I expect like I think Metroid Prime 4 is probably going to be a Switch 2 game. I don't think it's going to show up on Switch at all.
Well,
I
no,
mean,
well, it's already been long announced for the original, so that's why I'm saying I think it's going to be like a Breath of the
but
Wild situation, where it's like, well,
but
we've said it's going to be on Wii U forever, so we have to put it on Wii
but
U. Okay, counterpoint.
but I think the thing is because of how long it's been in development now, it would not be the first time a game has been announced for this system only to be canceled on that system to be put onto a later system. In some cases it works for them, in other cases it has not. And I think the one example that is the best example of saying, hey, this should not have been in the oven as long as it was Duke Nukem Forever, which is going to be a whole other topic on this podcast at a different episode talking kind of
Oh,
like these.
I can't wait for that one. That one's going to be fun.
I am at some point I want to go through a bunch of these games that like had these like development hell cycles where it was like they finally came out and it was essentially just a homunculus of what it could have been versus like it actually was the game that they needed at the time, you know?
Yeah.
There are so many examples. There's a series on YouTube by Matt McMuscles that's just called What Happened, and he goes into so many details of like these games that just had the worst development cycles, movies that did terribly like for one reason or another, and like he really goes through a lot of the research on it. I applaud him for it. I love watching those videos. But it's funnier to watch some of the ones where he has like what happened to this and how did it still somehow succeed, all things considered, because he has had a few of those episodes. And I really do love those episodes too, because it's like certain games definitely like had a lot stacked against them only to show up and be like, oh, we can actually still succeed. But yeah, that'll be a different topic because we have two more topics, and by my math, we are about 30 minutes ish in.
Yeah, no, and
This
you're,
is
you're right.
last time's episode again where we go on a tangent, and that's just we have topics picked, ready to go.
Right. Well, and
And
this is
then
good
30 minutes later, all right, here's topic one.
right. Well, sometimes that's how the intros go. On one of the podcasts I really like that inspired this one, on the Completely Unnecessary podcast, they have like 50-minute intros, and then they go in because it's like they cover just a ton
And
of
then it's like
stuff
10
back to back to
minutes
back to
of
back.
what they actually were going to talk about.
Yeah, well, right, and then it's like individual segments will be like 20 minutes on, but it's just on that one topic. Whereas like the intro will be like 8 or 9 different things, but they each talk about them for like 5 minutes each. And I'm not saying we have to copy that necessarily, but just in this case, this is something that sort of became like a bonus topic.
I mean, we can copy them at this point. It's like we're already 3/4 of the way to the word copy in our title right now. So
Yeah, I guess we are. Anyway, but you're right. We need to get into our main topics, and we got 2 topics today. We've been kind of going in the order of like Brandon and then into Boom here. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll change that. But why?
right.
Why
First
stop?
topic: why do words taste like peaches? I'm not serious. I just wanted to give us something to go with on that one.
Yeah, no. One day we'll buck the trend. Who knows?
One day.
Maybe in 33, but we'll see what happens. But first, I wanted to talk about a game. I previewed this last time, so it's time that we talk about this. In the year 2024, Brandon played a certain Nintendo 64 game, a certain Nintendo 64 RPG named Paper Mario. And, I hate doing this because whenever there's a beloved game and you have issues with it, everybody gets mad at you, right? But
That depends. Are you going to make me mad with what you're about to say?
I don't know. Do you adore the original Paper Mario?
The OG Paper Mario, or are you talking 1,000-Year Door?
N64 Paper Mario.
Okay, so I liked it. I've only played it once, though, so I don't have a good point of reference because it's been a while since I last beat it. I remember genuinely liking it, and it actually was the game that I learned that the stars that are in that game that you go and find are the same ones from Mario Party 5, because that's where I met them first, not in Paper Mario, in Mario Party 5.
Isn't that cool? I mean,
it was such a like unexpected like thing to see, and I'm like, oh, I know these guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's to me, that was one of the best parts of Mario Party 5 is like when you learn about that later. Although, like you, I'd played 5 first and then played Paper Mario, but it's just like,
right.
Wow. Because you'd never see something like that happen today.
Yeah, I mean, you could, potentially. I wouldn't completely throw it out of the realm of possibility. It's not as common, I think, is the better way to phrase it.
Sure. It's not impossible, but like, I've never seen Starlo show up in an original Mario game, only in Mario and Luigi. I mean, geez, you barely see Wario show up in a regular series Mario game. And I want to get that out of the way. There's a lot of stuff about that game that I think is great. Visually, wonderful. Musically, wonderful. The story, it's still like, compared to like any other RPG, it's a pretty subpar story. But for a Mario story, it's a good story. I think the world design is really good. A lot of my issues come down to battles and, of all things, statistics.
The math is your problem with Paper Mario?
Okay, yeah, I have to let me elucidate this a little bit more, okay? So, in most
Okay, I
RPGs, you have your health, you have your power, you have your defense, you have some kind of magic. You usually have like some kind of speed, a type of luck stat, and there's other kinds of stats too that like determine a lot of stuff. Paper Mario only has three. It's only got
mhm.
your health, it's got your flower points, so it's like your magic, and then you've got your BP, you got your badge points. And the big problem I have here is again something that I think people really like about the game usually, which are the badge points. Because with the badges, the cap of the badge points is 30, which sounds fine, but it really makes it the only viable stat to upgrade every time you level up until you hit that cap, because it's like once you're done with it, you're done with it. Now the same is true for HP and FP, but those like take longer to get to because the caps for those are 50 and you start with 10 each, if I recall. It might be 10 HP and 5 FP, but I'm pretty sure it's 10 each.
I think it's 10 and 10. I
That's
don't remember if it's what that is in the first one. I know in Thousand Year Door it is that.
okay.
Yeah, because I think it's 10-10-5, I think, for the badge points.
Yes, or it might be 10-10-3. I don't remember. It's not a giant huge deal here, but I need to do a little setup here.
Mhm.
So, but the thing with badge points is this is what I'm calling a complicated flaw, but to me it's still a flaw because badge points let you do everything else. And when I say everything else, I mean everything else. Because in order to have overworld upgrades, you need to spend badge points. In order to get more moves in battle, you need to spend badge points. And in order to improve certain stats, like your attack or your defense, you need to spend badge points.
Mhm.
And there is an extent, this is why I'm saying complicated, there's an extent to where it's like, okay, this is interesting. It's making you make important choices about how you choose to, upgrade Mario. But, or like, why I don't like it is because other games would make sure that you get some of all of those. And there is an extent, too, to like, okay, partners can act as like permanent upgrades in the overworld. When you get Locky Lester toward the end of the game, you can always ride on his cloud and then move through the world a little bit faster than you would compared to Mario walking. But similarly, there's also, so like you have a move that you can do in the overworld where you can spin to like get a little burst of speed and move faster than you were if you were just walking around. But then there's a whole nother badge that you could use badge points on to have an even faster spin and move even farther. But it's like, but that's taking away from my ability to, for example, use more moves in battle. I could have the badge on to, I don't know, throw my hammer at enemies and be able to essentially then use my hammer on airborne enemies, or I can move faster in the overworld. I could use the badge to get one additional attack point, and it's the only way to get that, other than I think you get an extra point when you get each new boot upgrade and new hammer upgrade. I can't remember for sure, but that sounds right. But, you're only limited to 30 points. So, like, when one of those, like when the attack bonus, or the power plus, I think it's called, is worth 6 of your badge points, you're really limiting your options for all the other ones. And that isn't to say, like, because I would argue being able to get one more attack point is not overpowered. In other, like, that's what I'm saying. In other games, you just get upgrades to all those a little bit along the way so that it feels like you're constantly scaling. And I think that's a flaw. I want to get your take on this as someone who who apparently loves the sequel, and I might love the sequel. Okay, I know in Thousand Year Door, for example, instead of the level cap being 30 or 27, excuse me, the level cap is 27 in the N64 game, and your BP cap is 30. In Thousand Year Door, your level cap is 99, and your BP cap is also 99. So, and also you're much less likely to reach it compared to Paper Mario 64. So I want to get your take on some of that first.
So, for me, something about the battle point system that I always appreciated more than anything was the battle points are interchangeable. And I think that's the thing that, like, from how it sounds from my perspective, you didn't like to do a lot of changing per se. And
Mm-hmm.
would argue that part of the game has to have it be that way. Because if you don't, then you're going to get stuck in this situation of I have no feasible way to beat this boss. Where in reality, I think the badge points are what help or make or break your fight before you even set foot. Like
Sure.
in Thousand Year Door, and I don't know how far are you in there right now?
I haven't started it yet because I'm going to start it after we've had this discussion.
Okay, so I will give you this. It's not really a super spoiler because I'm not going to tell you where it comes into play. There is a boss that actually gets annoyed by a particular badge you have if it's equipped. But here's the thing, it is the most useless badge in your entire arsenal at that point. So you have to equip it if you want to have an easier time with the boss at the expense of, well, why am I running this? This is a useless badge to begin with.
Sure.
That was part of the trick, is that they wanted to kind of see if you were paying attention a little bit. Because they give you like story cues as like you're kind of approaching that boss. So it's not like they're not telling you what it is. It's they want you to figure it out. And once you figure it out, that boss becomes significantly easier, all because of a badge that you had. And the best part is once the once the battle's done, you can get rid of that badge. You will never need it again unless you're just feeling like you want to just be a meme. That's it.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and that's true, and I agree. I think that that is a good part of the system because it's really all about customization, right? You can use the
mhm.
attacks you want. If you want more power, you can put on the Power Plus badge. If you want more defense, you can put on the Defense Plus badge. But I think it would work a lot better, and this is why I'm saying it's complicated, and I want to see how I feel going into Thousand Year Door. If I can, have more points and put more stuff on and feel like, okay, I can have all the moves I want, I can have the overworld upgrades that I want, and I can even have some like background, elements like one of these ones here that I pulled up the list just for sake of argument. Like let's say I wanted to use the money badge, and that makes Mario win twice the amount of coins in battle as he usually does. That's not really a badge I would tend to think I would use, but let's say like, okay, I can feel good, like I can have that, but I can still have multi bounce, and I can have the badge that lets me skip battles in the overworld if I'd get nothing out of it, because I
Mhm.
believe that's a badge, or I'm sort of a precursor to something I'm going to talk about shortly too. Then I'd be fine, because it's really just like, I'm not saying, because I understand the idea of like, well, you can't have everything, which is like understandable, of course. Again, that's part of the risk versus reward with this. But some of this stuff, some of the things just seem like things where it's like, well, other games just let me have this, and then I could still choose other pieces that I actually like are real choices. You know what I'm saying?
I think I get where you're going with it, but I think for me, something that I liked about both the original and in Thousand Year Door was just the creative approach that they gave with it. Because, like, the argument that you're making here about, like, oh, what if I want to put it in my stats? It's like, I think there's an important detail that we're kind of glossing over a little bit, and I do want to bring it up briefly. Is like, this is designed for kids in mind. Like, this isn't supposed to be this intricate, like, Final Fantasy, type of system
Mm-hmm.
with an RPG elements to it. It's a turn-based, kid-friendly approach to it. Like, these are the games that are probably for like the kids who are like maybe like 8 to 12 years old. They're just getting into this. So like you want to kind of ease them into it so that way they kind of understand it. And for kids, where I'm looking at it from this perspective is like, oh, I need to have more health. I put it in the health thing. Oh, I want to use my abilities more. I put it in the FP. Oh, these badges let me do a bunch of things. I'm going to put a bunch in there because then it means I get to put in new things. That's, I think, part of the charm of it is it's like you get to have the freedom as you're playing with the game on how are you going to play the game. Are you going to load it more into health because you don't want to die in battle? Are you loading it into FP, or are you going more balanced so that you kind of can be able to do a few things on across the board? And I know when I played it, I think both games I literally played it as like as balanced as possible, where it'd be like I'll level up hearts, then I'll level up FP, then I'll level up badges, and then kind of just keep rotating it until I can't anymore.
True,
And
true. But again, counterpoint, Mario and Luigi is the other Mario RPG series, and they have all those stats. And when you level up, you get to choose a stat that you want to give like bonus points to. So you still get that choice, but you also still get all the other stats. And later games in the series, too, also have their own badge system that let you have like these upgrades, and you still get like moves in the overworld that you get to use. So like I guess I'm saying like I see what you're saying here, but like that's just as much I would argue a quote unquote kid friendly RPG, and it still gives you all those options. I mean, it's the big reason why last time I concluded I was like, I think I probably like Mario and Luigi better, but I want to give the Thousand Year Door a fair shake because it's obviously a well known, super beloved game, right? And it's clearly like it builds on Paper Mario, and it should. So I'm not expecting them to like change things extremely radically, but I still think this is like a core issue to where it's just like, well, I need to be able to use like I need to be able to make Mario how I want Mario to be mostly. I'm not saying I have to have my cake and eat it too, but like I need to be able to like get a good amount of the stuff I want. Whereas in Mario and Luigi, because all those pieces are in separate systems, I simply do get what I want, regardless.
so, and this is going to be another argument that I have. I get where you're coming at with the Mario and Luigi series, and I do think part of the thing is there was about a 2 to 3 year gap between these two series. So the developmental side of things probably made it a little bit different because they looked at Paper Mario as like, oh, how do we introduce these to, kids? And to them, they were, let's simplify the battle system, which they did, and it worked. And then as, Mario and Luigi series came into play, kids got older. They were probably targeting to the same kids that they got playing Paper Mario originally, and they wanted a little bit more of a challenge, so they made them this. So I think where you're going with it isn't necessarily wrong. I think it's just that these were also two very different things where Nintendo was kind of looking at it like, okay, we, catered to these younger kids. They're still playable games. Like this is like a, what, 2 3 year gap between the two, and now we have Mario and Luigi, which is a little bit more intricate, and there's a little bit more to do, but it still gives them both. Like they're very similar series if you really boil them down, because they have the overworld, they have a partner literally for Mario because Luigi is in Mario and Luigi, and Paper Mario has all these other elemental, they're not elemental, all these different sidekicks essentially in the first two games at least. And you're doing stuff in the overworld. You still have a battle system of some type. It's just the level of intricacy at that point. And I think that was like an intentional choice by Nintendo. Like they are obviously made by different developers because I think the original Paper Mario, I want to say it was Hudson Soft, I think.
Intelligent Systems.
Okay, so Intelligent Systems did the development, and then Mario and Luigi was developed by who?
Alpha Dream.
Ooh, Alpha Dream. Yeah, God, I miss Alpha Dream. Um,
Don't we all?
but the fact of the matter is that they had both of these being developed, so they both had to kind of come up with their own system with it. And I think Alpha Dream did it this way, Intelligent Systems did it this way, but Nintendo wanted this to be like, I want kids to be able to understand this a lot easier. Like, it's not saying like they're stupid or anything like that. It's that it becomes so much easier to get into when you know what you're doing, and it doesn't take you, oh, it's a 30-minute tutorial that finally explain what are these things that I need for magic or something like that. Like these are literally, hey, we're going to teach you this in the first like 5-10 minutes. and you basically know everything you need to know. If
Mm-hmm.
we come up with new stuff, we'll let you know. Like in Thousand Year Door, they give you like all these things that like you get these outside abilities for the Paper Mario can actually like turn into these things for one thing or another for the overworld exploration. But they tell you when it comes relevant. So I think at the end of the day, Paper Mario was designed more to be able to be a good entry point for kids. And as adults, even, they still can find enjoyment in it because, it's simple, but it's still, elaborate enough where it's like you get to decide what it is that you're leveling up. You get to decide what badges that you're putting on. You get to decide how combat works, both what you're using and who you're attacking. There's a lot of good elements in it when it comes down to it on both kids and adults for the game. And same thing with Mario and Luigi, which we can definitely get into a different time, but like overall, I think Mario and Luigi is also a very solid series as well too. It's just a different series. It's the same kind of concept as like I'm going to compare apples and peaches. Yeah, they're both fruits, but they're both very different for a reason. Like, that's why we don't have, like, this one over this one. It's like, it's going to come down to a personal preference at a certain point. They're both inherently good. They're just different, so they're not going to be necessarily here for XYZ reasons for what I'm doing. Like, if I want to go play Paper Mario, I'll go play Paper Mario. If I want to go play Mario and Luigi, I'll go play Mario and Luigi. If I want to go play Super Mario RPG, I'll play Super Mario RPG. Comparing and contrasting the series that are, like, in the same spheres, we'll say, is a little unfair in some cases, but it's not like unwarranted, you know?
Sure, sure. I think that's fair, but I guess I'm just not as convinced that like you know I see what you're saying, that it's like having different stats, it can make it harder to understand, because I'm thinking back to like the one I started with in general was Super Paper Mario. Then I played Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Stories, like my first like RPG, and certainly my first Mario RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And I can envision at the time thinking like, well, I kind of get the idea, like, okay, well, HP, it's got the heart by it, and that always goes down when I get hit, so that's my health, so I want that to be high. But not necessarily getting a full explanation of these systems, like, oh, pow, pow, so okay, so that, oh, I see, like, now that I'm at, like, level 2, instead of level 1, that the jump I did, it was only doing, like, I don't know, 3 damage, and now it's doing 4. And if I make that better, I get 4. So I think that, like, for one thing, I think I see what you're saying is like kids maybe don't fully grasp those, but also like kids are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, right? Like some people think kids are just incredibly stupid, and that's not fair to kids either, because they are pretty smart. It's like they can grasp the idea of like, okay, I mean, with some of the bigger words like, okay, defense, what does defense mean? Well, it's got the shield on it, and I know from like fairy tales or whatever, the shield is a thing that like protects you. But even that, I could still even kind of see being like a thing that's maybe a little bit more abstract in their minds. But if I don't think all these things need like super duper duper long explanations. They just need to see in practice how it works. And I don't, but I'm just not as convinced that like taking that away to an extent makes that better, because then you're just not explaining it to them. You're making that a problem for a different RPG.
I mean, I understand that point. I don't think that's inherently like an unfair thing to say. Like kids are smarter. But I do think there's also this question of accessibility with a lot of these games cuz like
Mm.
I have never been a person to get into MMOs. I was one of like 6 people when Skyrim came out, and I did not care about the game whatsoever. Didn't bother getting it, still haven't bothered to play it. I may never play it. There's a very good chance of that. That doesn't inherently mean that I'm too stupid, I guess, for lack of a better word, to understand what's going on.
Sure.
It was just it just didn't speak to me when I was seeing games coming out, and I looked at Skyrim and said, "Eh." Like I remember when that game came out, every one of my roommates was playing Skyrim at the time, and no one else was playing anything but Skyrim for like a solid almost month. and I was still playing League. I was still playing stuff on the GameCube. I was still playing all these other games that weren't Skyrim. And I think kind of having this ability to have like a healthy series of games that are all to some level of degree of success gives people a little bit more freedom in that choice. So like you may not like Paper Mario, but you may like Mario and Luigi. Like you kind of are sounding more on that boat. And
Well, right, and in a similar way to you, that's kind of like I know you love trading card games. Like it's probably not that hard, right? I could totally understand how to do it if I learned it, but it's like the thought of like trying to make a deck and having it be how I want it sounds very overwhelming. So I completely agree. There's something to be said for like, if you just don't like it, or if it isn't as accessible to you, then just don't play it. And I think that's completely fair here.
and we'll get more into that. I do like where this question's going, but let's save it for my topic because
Yeah.
it does tie into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the bottom line of it, Paper Mario is just a really good starting spot, I feel like, for a lot of people who are interested in that type of genre. It's kid friendly, it's something that's like easy to grasp, it's fun, it's simple, but in the same breath, it still can be more complicated. And you can still feel something from the story even as an
Yep.
adult.
Yeah.
I think that's really what it boils down to for me is like I'm not saying like it has to be everyone's favorite game, but there's no denying that it's a good game, period.
Absolutely, I'm 100% with you there. The things that I'm bringing up here, and I have a couple more, but I'm gonna make them relatively quick so we can move on to what you want to talk about. These are just like these are issues, and I think it's worth thinking about them. Where it's like, okay, did this really need to be done like this? And similarly, like, you know, I don't think, for example, that the Thousand Year Door would have extended its level cap to 99 and extended its badge points to 99 if they didn't acknowledge like maybe this is a little bit too much of an artificial limitation, and that there are people who could be like how I'm looking at this, where it's just like, well, I want more options.
Or, hear me out,
Counterpoint, yet again.
when it comes down to like all of these improvements that Thousand Year Door made, I think it was the same thing. Like we're talking about a game that came out like 20, 24, 25 years ago, somewhere like that. And all the things that you're bringing up are probably similar to what other people were saying around the same time when the sequel was being worked on, which is probably why they increased the caps. That's probably why they increased the levels. That's probably why they did all these things. So people could literally get more out of it and said, hey, I really like the first game, but this is something I would probably change. Or maybe it was even an internal decision where they're just like, yeah, we probably would have did this differently if we, had a little bit more time or if we thought a little bit further ahead with it. Things like that. And maybe it's a little superficial that we're talking about a game almost 25 years later, like as someone who only played that game maybe like 10 years ago, kind of saying, what we would take as, hey, this is a really good game. Here's some things that I would like to change about it. And like for us, as we're late bloomers into this game, we didn't play it when it first came out. So there could have been very different things. I was playing this on a freaking Wii U, so I by no means have anything to say on this one aside from the fact that like, yeah, I finally played it and I enjoyed it. But I think it's important that like even as like people who just played it for the first time, it's like we have our things that we would have liked to change. We have our gripes with it, but we also have things that we like about it, like we've been talking about. And I think that's a very important thing to have with this type of conversation. This is decades later from when it came out, but like there are a bunch of people who are probably playing this for the first time still. Maybe they saw a list of like, hey, I want to play through all these really like important, N64 games. So they played it. Or, maybe someone's just looking to play a bunch of RPGs and see how they all kind of compare and contrast. Every day there's a new person who's probably playing this game for the first time, or at least every so often that someone's starting for the first time.
Yep.
And I think they're all going to have similar conversations like one we're currently having.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason, like, similarly, you said you played it on a Wii U. I first played it a little bit on Virtual Console on the Wii, but then I finally actually fully played it on N64 NSO, right? So there's a reason it keeps getting added because people are going to want to play it, and people are going to want to, have these kinds of experiences. See, like, okay, what was an RPG like in 2001 versus an RPG in, 1993 versus an RPG in 2024, And they're totally different experiences, and you have to, like, kind of see the aggregate of how do I feel about this one? How do I feel about that one? And they're all fit. But I agree there is also something to be said for, like, my opinion is in some ways colored by the experience of it is January 2025. So I've seen what other RPGs have done and learned from how these other games have handled things. As far as the last couple things I wanted to talk about here, this is one thing that I just found really annoying for completion purposes. Did there really need to be 64 Chuck Quizmo questions?
Was there that many?
And there are 64. I kid you not, there are 64.
But you see what they did there.
No, I know exactly what they did there, but that doesn't make it good. Because every single one of them gives you a star piece.
What I heard is before the Riddler trophies, there were the Chuck questions.
Yes, there were the Chuck questions, which is fine, but I'm just saying I think they could have been fine if they cut them in half, or if, there was some other benefit than just a star piece for each one, or better yet, because here's the real reason that it's a problem, is it's not like you just go to a place and that's where the quiz happens. He just kind of, he has certain places he can show up in randomly, and the odds of you running into him 64 times during the game and getting the question right every single time the first time are pretty slim. So I'm just saying, I either would have cut down the number of questions, or given them more star pieces, or given them a place where it's like, this is, Chuck Quizmo's quiz corner or something like that. I don't know. Because that's just a lot of, like,
special. You're gonna win a star piece quiz. Question 1, what's my name?
Right, yeah, well, yeah, and some of the questions are stuff like that. So it's just like, or just at some point figure out a way to, like, make cleanup a little bit less annoying with that. And granted, I know not everybody goes for 100%, not everybody's going to collect all these, but it's just like, just throw me a little bone here. I don't need a ton, just give me a little something.
I mean, that's, I think, fair. I really think that's fair, honestly.
And then the last point, and this kind of ties into, like, the bigger discussion we had on this, but, like, the game gets stingy with star points really easily. Now, granted, level ups are only every time you get 100 star points, you level up. So all you need to do is get 2,700 star points, and you're at level 27, and you're done, right? Or I guess maybe it's 2,600 because you start at level 1. I digress. In that same vein, if you're going for cleanup, if you're going for 100%, you're doing side quests, you're going to end up going back to areas you've previously visited, and, it's not like you're not going to avoid every enemy every time, so inevitably you're going to get in a battle. And then even though, let's say for whatever reason you're just screwing up the timing and you get a bunch of needless chip damage, and you still come out of it with either, maybe you get 1 to 2 star points, or better yet, at some point you just get none. So I wasted all that time to get nothing for it, which is fine, because I did confirm there is a badge, the Bump Attack badge. Mario can defeat weak enemies, aka who no longer give star points, by walking into them. So then you just skip the battle straight up like you would in Earthbound, but that costs 5 badge points, which is a sixth of your badge points, which, sure, you could argue is pretty powerful, but, like, I don't see a value in general in getting into a battle to get nothing out of it.
Well, so my thought process on that would be, like, if I'm going out of my way to do a bunch of side stuff and I'm going to get annoyed real quick, but I have to keep fighting all these people, that badge legitimately solves the problem here for me. But that's my take on it. I do get where you're coming off of it, though, because I think if I remember right, when I was playing through it, I wanted to do a bunch of the side stuff that was going on still, and I ended up basically just at a point of, okay, I have to do something about this or I'm going to lose my ever-loving mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the out, and it helped out significantly. I already knew I was going to beat all these enemies somehow, So what's the point of me fighting them? And then I just power through that entire side thing.
Yeah, I think that's one that really could have been solved by either just because obviously they thought about that. They would have made the badge if they weren't thinking about it.
Right.
But then to me, it's either okay, I need to get a more reasonable reward for going back and still fighting these, or maybe it was just as simple as like instead of making this 5 badge points, we make it 3 badge points. Just something, because there's just a simple convenience factor for that. Especially because the bump attack badge, the only way you can get it as well is through a side quest. You have to do the Rip Cheeto side quest in the tunnels. So it's like you have to go out of your way to find it anyway. So it's really meant for those people, like you talked about, the people who are like going to be more hardcore, that maybe aren't just the kid playing his RPG, his or her RPG for the first time. So like I think there's something to be said for like, okay, if we make this a little bit lower, we know you've already done a lot of work to try to get here in the first place. You're clearly trying to get this done. Just kind of like I said with the 64 quiz question, just throw me a bone here. Just give me a little something. Like I'm trying to put in the extra work because I want to finish this game completely. Just do something to make it a little bit easier. And kind of a sub point to that, to my issue with the battles, the experience point to damage ratios, because you maybe get 4 badge points out of a battle, even in later areas. You can still, like, when I left the Crystal Palace, that's the 7th chapter of the game. I was like, I finished the dungeon, I'm going back. Whoops, I get into a battle with 4 enemies. I was at 40 HP. I left it at 21, and I only get 4 star points out of that. Like, that just seems like, way off, to me at least.
And that's a fair assumption, I think.
I mean, that's pretty much all I had. People have issues with chapter 6 that I wrote down. Like, you can miss the bulbs along the way. You have to do a lot of back and forth, but that wasn't as big a deal for me, but I can completely see why that'd be a problem for other folks. But yeah, that's what I had. So I think I did not completely offend you by saying Paper Mario is not a perfectly crafted game.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that sentiment. I don't know why you keep thinking you're insulting me on that. I'm just like, no, dude, you're entitled to
I'm just
your
saying
opinion.
some people really love it, although I tend to think people are way more in love with the 1,000-Year Door in particular. And I'm just saying, I think these are issues that, to an extent, will carry over into the 1,000-Year Door.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's move on. You want to start talking about a lot of cardstock with pretty pictures on them, is my understanding.
So, not quite that, cut and dry as much as I would like to admit. I had a topic that's been very, very interesting to me personally for a few years now, and I figured this might be a good time to just get it all out for me. As someone who has spent many a time, what we were talking about earlier with collectible card games, I raised a question of what makes people want to keep playing them. It's not saying it's an inherently bad type of game. I don't want to make it sound like that. As someone who still plays Paper Magic, who still plays however many others from time to time, just on a whim. And I played, I think at least 4 or 5 of them at some point in my life or another. What is the thing that keeps people coming to them? And I even went as far as saying, is there too many in the market right now? Because I looked at some of the more electronic and online style of games that they have. And it got me kind of thinking, it's how many people are truly playing these games? Realistically. And I actually went down a rabbit hole when I was researching the topic last week. And I got some very interesting statistics on it, for sure. I really wanted to kind of dig into, what's the thing that's keeping people playing online card games, from Magic Arena Online, to Pokemon TCG Pocket, to Hearthstone, to Marvel Snap, to even Runeterra still, Legends of Runeterra by Riot. What keeps people coming back over and over again, even if it's not daily? They still will come back at some point.
All right. Well, and you raised that question. You talked about, okay, well, are there too many in the market right now? And, I pointed out earlier, I'm someone who's this kind of sounds a little overwhelming. This seems like a lot. So, I'm kind of outside of this space. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of, a newbie, so to speak. So I guess I would tend to think, and maybe this is just my own bias because of my perspective coming into this, but I would tend to think that these types of games already sort of have a smaller audience because of that. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what would it mean if there's like too many games on the market? Like, would it be better? Because you have, like you said, you got Magic, Hearthstone. I think I'm counting 5 here. Like, would it be better if there were like 3? Is it making player bases too small? Are they too fractured? Like, what becomes the issue there?
I feel like on some level, like as if you're looking at it from the outside perspective, like yeah, because like I was actually shocked by some of the numbers I was pulling last week when I was
Like,
researching this.
like shocked because they were big or small, or what surprised you?
I don't know. It like legitimately, I couldn't tell you if it was like I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, that seems low. Oh, that seems high. I'm like, that just doesn't feel like it's the right number, you know? I kept looking at the numbers and I'm like, I know there's a popular entire like grouping of people that are playing these games to some degree. But like kind of going into the stats here a little bit. I looked at the Magic and for context for everybody who's listening, all the stats that I'm about to list I took from January 10th of this year. So these are about a week old now, but they should still be fairly recent that they have some level of relevancy still. So I started with Magic Arena online and I looked at the last 30 days of like people who are playing. And according to one source, it was saying that there were roughly 5,300 players on Steam over the past 30 days, compared to in November was it hit nearly 12,000 players. And this is according to Steam chart for both of those numbers. What was surprising was kind of like how it lost more than half of it in the course of like 2 months. And the more I was kind of looking into it, I made the realization of November, there was a new set that came out around the time, Duskmorn, which is a Magic set that's based on 80s and 90s movie horror tropes. Like, quite literally, it's an entire plane that is just one giant haunted house. And
That's pretty pretty funny.
oh yeah, if you go down the Magic rabbit hole at some point, you will be shocked by the level of stuff that has essentially like I'm kind of a weird fan of like the lore of it, where it's like I prefer having it more of like in this purist style of setting where it's like, these are these fantasy elements and then they go to all these different planes that are like they're different, but they have like their own niche thing to it. Like they have a lot of different planes in Magic where like I think they're allowed to be able to experiment a little bit with like how their cards play, but they also do take a few liberties where they're like just changing certain things enough that are just popular enough. Best example I can think of was like Strixhaven. It's literally a plane that's effectively Hogwarts from Harry Potter, where it's these 5 houses are all competing and it's essentially one big university, but all of them are a 2-color combination of the Magic colors. And they all have, these different things that they do really well because of the colors that they're in. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, that's going to get the Harry Potter crowd. And then like Duskmorn, which I literally mentioned just not a little bit ago, that's going to get the horror movie trope fans, like, because they're going to look at it and like they have all these nods to these old school things. Like they have essentially the Ghostbusters vacuum, they have the Necronomicon from Evil Dead, so to speak. They're all just changed enough to avoid legality reasons for or like anything like that. But like as a player and as even a casual fan, you can recognize what they're going for here. And then like Magic also has this ability to have their own planes that are just so far fetched to the point of like, oh, that's actually kind of sick. I would never have thought of that, and I'm glad this exists now. One of my personal favorites is a plane called Ixalan, where it is essentially an island that nobody can get off of because there is something keeping everybody there for it. And there's like 2 initial groups of people that are actually supposed to be there, and then there's 2 others that effectively have kind of become a thing despite the fact that they're not necessarily originally from that area. Like there's a whole like group of people who essentially they worship like these elder dinosaurs. They're really connected with the dinosaur population on the island. There's a group of merfolks, which is like, okay, this all tracks so far. And then we get into pirates, who is apparently just a bunch of different pirates that have sort of accidentally stumbled into Ixalan and haven't been able to find a way home, so they all kind of just end up doing this. It's like, oh, okay, we're just pirates now. Cool. And then the final one is, I kid you not, Vampire Conquistadors.
Vampire, see, it's what you throw in the conquistadors
Yeah,
that I get a little,
yeah, and
hmm.
unironically,
That's,
they have one of the funniest, like, not funny haha, but like funny as in like, yeah, I actually see how this all tracks now, storylines. They are effectively following this like vampire bishop, and there's this whole like ceremony that they're trying to do. Like part of their religion, as it were, is that they do a blood fast where they do not drink blood like a normal vampire until like a certain point, and then they essentially just feast. So like they have
mm,
like a strict code of conduct, but they're also like this group that of all the groups that are in there probably fit the least out of the four. But it's one of my favorite planes, and like I can even go into more in depth on it, but like, I'm not gonna go that in depth. But there's like Innistrad, which is like more gothic horror style of like the usual things you'd see in like older style horror stories, like werewolves and traditional vampires, spirits, zombies, that sort of thing. Omniket was a really cool one where it effectively was ancient Egypt, but it's treated like Atlantis in a way, where it's like this old ancient Egyptian city that is just surrounded by nothing but desert. Like there's nothing else for miles but sand. It's essentially Egyptian Atlantis is the best way it was described. And I'm like, that's sick. I love that. I love so many of like the planes that they've come up with, and then like in recent years they've kind of, for lack of a better word, they've jumped the shark a little bit. Like they just finished a very major plot point story that they did like a year or two ago, and they finished it. It ended weird, but I think overall it wasn't like the worst story of how it ended. And now we're going into this next set that's coming out, like for the story wise, is a set about a massive, essentially Mad Max race that's going to be taking place in like three different planes. There's so much to unpack with it that I'm not going to go into it on here, but like compared to like, oh yeah, these are these high fantasy elements, and it's like, screw it, we're going to give you cars. What?
right. Yeah, that's something that was a question I was thinking about as you're describing all this is, well, if you're someone like, if I would think if you're playing Magic,
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I'm thinking about, I want high fantasy. I want wizards and warlocks and medieval type things that I think about with that. So then when I start hearing about, oh, Mad Max race,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe that comes across to me as like, well, maybe that's a cheap way to get those people into it, but are they going to stay,
Oh,
for one thing?
the,
And are you going to alienate the people who want the high fantasy out of it? And that's not to, and I mean, maybe describing it as a cheap way, like makes it sound like I'm saying it's cheap, like it's like a cheat to getting them in there. But I'm just saying it's like it's a quick. I'm saying it's more like a quick way to try to like to pique their interest. But it's not necessarily going to convert them into a fan. And I think maybe that could have something to do with some of those numbers where it's like you see Spike, but then the people who like then they think about it are like, oh, well, I don't care about this. Why am I playing this? But
right.
just because I care about this one thing, I don't care about the other thing.
Yeah, and I'm in that boat a little bit where it's like I kind of will see like certain sets and I'm like, I don't really need anything from this set. Like I'm gonna follow the story just to see what's going on. But like this set that's called Aether Drift, the one that's the Mad Max race, I'm not really stoked about, if I'm being honest. There might be some cards that I'll get like for decks down the road when like it officially comes out, but I'm like, I don't really need to go too heavy into this. And I'm okay with that. Like the set that's coming after that is actually they're returning to a plane called Tarkir, which is a plane that effectively had a giant time spiral effect where it was like, so there were like three sets the last time that they were there. The first one was like cons, where there were these different like tribes effectively. Like there are five tribes that were all three colors, and each tribe did stuff differently, and they were the ones that ruled the plane. And then it goes into Fate Reforged, which the whole story follows. Hey, I'm gonna go time warp this, and all these dragons are gone, so I'm gonna go fix that. And then after that is fixed, we get into the next set, which is Dragons of Tarkir, which effectively switched it up as the cons do not take power. They actually are essentially like either like they have like these terrible fates bestowed upon them, or they get like weirdly like far away from what they originally were, and then the dragons are the ones that are effectively in charge. And it's a really cool series of events that happens. And it was like the first time I think they ever tested something like that, and a lot of people liked it. And we're supposed to be going back to that plane now, which is supposed to be like there's supposed to be a war now against I think all the tribes now. So I'm very excited to see how that one goes. And frankly, big lizards with wings is already going to have my attention way more than Mad Max race.
Right, and that's just because that's what you're expecting out of this,
Right.
not Mad Max. And that's not, saying anything bad about that. It's just it's something totally different. So they don't necessarily go together.
Right. And would you believe me that if I told you that Spider-Man is going to show up in a set is weird?
Yeah, I would tend to think that's another thing that it's like these things generally don't mix.
Yup. They're still going to make a Spider-Man set though coming out this year. I know that is a real thing, and I'm really confused myself personally. I don't know what it's all.
Why not at that point? I would want to do something like a spin-off, like because it's not like there isn't I guess I don't know if this is an actual set, but like there's Marvel Monopoly. It's not,
They're
and
Marvel,
granted, these aren't the
Marvel
same
cards.
type of things.
There's Marvel cards. They actually they have a thing called Secret Lair where they like make these like specialty cards from time to time, or like they'll make these special edition artwork cards for like ones that are really popular. They made an entire like grouping of like I want to say it's like 25, 30 cards of various Marvel heroes. So like there's an Iron Man one, there's a Black Panther one, there's a Wolverine one, there's a Storm one. I think there's another one, but I'm kind of forgetting who it is offhand. But like they all came with like their own collection of cards too. And like it's cool. It's not saying like it's inherently a bad thing, but it's like the Spider-Man set just feels a little weird because like this is an official set coming out. Like it doesn't tie into the story. It's just, hey, we're making a Spider-Man set, and everyone's either really excited or going, why? And
Right, that's what I'm saying is like if these things don't work together, just make it its own side thing that you can use with this. Like you don't need to put in the full effort of like, well, how do I figure out how this works into the story and how do I make sure that I get the other people interested in this? Just like
and they
I'm not saying you have to make a whole separate game, but it's like, you need to make those for the Spider-Man people, not the Magic people, if that makes sense.
right, and I think the big thing that came out of that whole front was like the Spider-Man is its own like story-wise, it's its own thing. It's not going to tie into the original main Magic story, but it does play into like certain formats. Like this is an official standard legal set that they're going to be making for the game itself. So we're going to have like in literally 3 sets just in this first like 6 months is going to feature essentially Mad Max style of things, dragons, and Spider-Man. And there will be a deck at some point that will have all of these facets, I'm sure. But what I think is weird about it is it's like it's all so disjointed, and it's kind of been like that since last year. Ever since they finished like their main story, everything kind of like it's a story, but then it like is still kind of not fully fleshed out, or it's not all like meshing together like as a full on story. Like if you look at them separately, then sure, yeah, they all have like their own little beats that seem like a cool little short story effectively. But like last year we had Murders at Karlov Manor, which was effectively like a whodunit detective set, which felt really weird. And a lot of people were upset about that one because it was going to a really popular plane that people love, but it didn't feel like the plane that they were used to, where it was essentially the whole plane is like a giant city that has 10 guilds that run it, but they're all kind of vying for power still, and they all do things very differently. Like there's one that's effectively a senate, there's one that's a giant army, there's one that's essentially scientists that are looking to create via fusing different beings together. Like there's a lot of cool things in that one, and this was just kind of a cheap hash of, hey, we're in Ravnica again and we're gonna kill some people. Like that felt like a really forced set. And then there was after that there was a set that was effectively a Western, which I will be honest was one of my favorite sets of all time, just because it's cowboys and I think it's stupidly fun. It just didn't have like a lot connecting to it except for like some minor stuff with the main characters and like the overarching story at the time. Then we had Bloomborough, which was effectively imagine D&D, but it's all like cute fuzzy creatures, and they're all fighting these like elemental beast gods essentially. That one was probably the closest to like anything we'd seen up until that point. And apparently, like, there's an in-lore reason that if you go to that plane, you become anthropomorphized, where you become an animal of some type.
I mean, I could see how that kind of comes together, but some of the other ones, like yeah, they're kind of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they go past what I would think would be the understandable like boundaries
Yeah.
of what you would expect from this.
Like, just of the bits that I've told you up until this point, like, you can tell that there's some kind of, like, questionable things in the story when it comes to, like, the overarching thing.
It's not really that they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's more like they're trying to figure out, like, it's more of a, we're going to throw something against the wall and see what sticks kind of approach they're going for right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think at that point, just, you got to acknowledge, like, okay, we can't do much more with this. Let's just do something totally different. Let's have magic, but it's cowboys, and it's its own game.
I think part of the problem with it is, like, in a lot of the older sets that they used to do, it wouldn't be like, hey, we're going to 4 different planes a year. It would be, we are going to, like, 2 planes maybe every year and a half. Because what they would do is, instead of it being like, oh, we're going to go to this one this time, this one this time, this one this time, this one this time, and that's all in, like, a course of a year, they would spread out like 3 sets at one point where it was all on the same plane and it was this massive overarching story, like what I had mentioned with Tarkir. That was what it used to be, where it would allow people to kind of be able to digest everything that's going on, and it kind of elaborates everything as it's happening. The Innistrad block that they originally came out with, it had essentially just been we're going to set the table here. This is Innistrad, werewolves, ghouls, spirits, and humans are fighting to just stay alive. It's exactly what you'd expect. And then they go into Dark Ascension, which was like getting more into the actual lore and story of the plane. And then they did Avacyn Restored, where it was like the climax of that story. You give them 3 sets to effectively set all these things up, instead of, here's one set, let's make sure that everybody knows what's all happening in the course of like less than a month, and then we're going to go somewhere else in like 3 months. I think that's the part that loses me a little bit, is it's like, I love the game. I hate the handling of the story. And I know we've gone completely off the rails on what
I was thinking about that. Like, we've gone a little outside of the bounds of where we started here.
But like, the thing that gets me about Magic, and kind of to rein it back into what I was bringing up, is like, I had mentioned earlier, it was like, it hit 12K players in November, probably because of the Duskmoor set that released at the time from Magic Online. And then I was digging more into it, because I realized that these numbers are only for Steam.
Okay.
There is...
I assume it's on other platforms. Like, I think there's a mobile version of these kinds of things too, right?
But there was also at one point just its own thing. It was literally its own program that you could download. So it didn't need Steam. That's how it initially released, was through that. And
it's just a PC game.
Yeah, it was like when you downloaded online, you would set it up, it would have it kind of did the same thing like League did for a while, whereas you downloaded the client and then you would be able to launch it from there. That's what it basically did for the longest time. And when I looked at it from that perspective, the numbers jumped significantly. So to give you context, active players as of January 10th of this year, there were around 1.5 million players in the past 30 days.
It's a lot of players.
And just people who got in, like just played the game maybe for a little bit or even logged in, was 5.5 million.
That's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people playing Magic.
To me, what that suggests is there's a lot of people sticking around.
Yes.
Because if getting it on Steam is a relatively new thing, I would have thought it would have been like, you know, lower numbers, like, oh, you have to know about Magic, you have to know about this, as opposed to like when you're on Steam, maybe you just see it and you're like, oh, that looks interesting, and then you download it and then go from there. But I'm kind of getting from this is it seems like it's the opposite. It's like there's really, really hardcore people, and then there's a few people who are like, oh, this is interesting, but most people kind of stay away.
Right. And to give you context, that like the 5.5 in the last 30 days does not compare to its peak, which was apparently back in October of 2020. And it was almost 8 million people.
It's a lot of people, too.
And that
actually, I mean, what am I saying? That's the most people we've had so far.
That was pre-Steam and mobile. That was just them saying, hey, we did this. You guys can go play online if you want. 8 million people effectively decided, hell yeah, we're going to get into this. And as it's been kind of shown, plenty of people are still sticking around.
Well, or it's just kind of fluctuated. Like they've gotten more people, and then some people fall off, and it's gotten more people to stay. I'm just saying there's multiple explanations for it. But you're right. A lot of people clearly must be sticking around.
Right.
To get to 5.5 million compared to 8, like that's not a gigantic drop in the grand scheme of things.
Like, if you really like want to boil it down by numbers, it's a big drop, but whatever. But like at the same time, it's like they have been adding stuff into the client. They've been adding game modes, they're adding the new sets as they're releasing in public and like in-person Magic. So it's like you now have another way to play Magic with your friends if say you want to go play with someone online that you can't go see every day at like your local game store. And I think that's why I think especially Magic Online has been so successful, is because it's like, yeah, it may not be the most popular on Steam, but it's like there's still a massive group of people who downloaded it when it first came out, and even if they're just playing it periodically, that still adds up to a lot of things, because it's like, yeah, maybe I'll just try a couple games of Standard and see if this deck works that I have. They have like a really good system, I think, in place. I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch, and I'm not going to go into depth with it there, but like they are clearly doing something right, and maybe having just the longevity of being a game that's been around for like 30 years is part of that secret with it.
Definitely helps.
I think it being kind of like a grandfathered game, essentially, where it's like it's one of like the first real big card games. I think it gets like a very big boost in the fact that it's like it's gonna be around for a while, unless for some reason like somebody up top for them does something really, really stupid. But right now, I don't see them slowing down.
Sure. Well, and how does this compare to other games?
So we're kind of looking into that here. Next one that I kind of looked into was Hearthstone, which I was actually surprised by. In the last 30 days, when I took the statistics, they had 4.2 million players in 30 days, according to ActivePlayer.io. And that included 1.1 million active players in the past 30 days. So, like, just in general, that was pretty decent. And apparently the, like, highest peak that Hearthstone had was last year in February, where it was at nearly 6 million players.
Really? I'm kind of surprised it's that recent, because it's not like Hearthstone is a super duper new game either.
Yeah, because I'm looking it up right now. I want to say it was, like, came out in 14?
That sounds right,
Yeah.
like mid-2010s.
Yeah, Hearthstone was released on April 16th. Oh, no, sorry, that's for iOS. It was released March 11th in 2014, and then about a month later released on iOS, and then like 8 months later on Android. So 2014, yeah.
So very similar, a game with some longevity. People clearly stick around to an extent.
Right, and I think because in Hearthstone's case is that they have a little bit of longevity because of what it's based off of. Because I'm assuming you've never played it, right?
Nope, I've not played any of these because card games make me like,
Okay.
That's a lot of thinking.
So Hearthstone was a Blizzard Entertainment property, and it was actually based off of World of Warcraft. And that's been around since about 2014, so we are at the 11-year mark for these guys, basically, which is astonishing in its own right. Like, it's a third of Magic, but still really good, all things considered. And I have seen that game kind of go up and down. Like, when I was looking up the numbers, it's like, yeah, there were some really high highs, but there were also some really low lows. Like, this game probably could have a couple of times probably gotten ended at any point if it, like, didn't pick up for whatever reason. And there were a few times in the... That's when I was looking at it initially. I don't remember any offhand, but yeah, Hearthstone has definitely had a turbulent time for being around for 11 years.
That's interesting, because I've kind of perceived it as having been relatively popular always along the way.
I mean, it can, but like I remember there's a guy I follow on YouTube who was talking about that there was actually a set that almost killed it at one point. Like, and I think it was during like the pandemic, where it was like they came out with a set and it was very questionable card design at the time. And it really shut off a lot of players to the point of they weren't coming back to play for like a long, long time. I don't know. Hearthstone is one of those games that like has kind of a, I don't want to say fickle fan base, but it definitely has a fan base that it's like if it's not happy with the product, it will go away for a while. So it's understandable. But the fact that right now that we're looking at it and it's having like still over 1 million players within the last month, that's still impressive to me.
it's not well, I guess you could describe it as like they vote with their wallet. They tell you, we don't like this, do something else.
Right. I think the big thing that kind of comes out of this one, though, is like it's a very simple game by comparison because, like, unlike a lot of the card games, like Magic, for example, Hearthstone typically only lets the player whose turn it is do anything. The main thing is, like, you'll get a mana crystal up until, like, a 10 mana crystal cap where you can cast your spells, play creatures, that sort of thing. But you can't really be interacted with. It's more of a, hey, I'm going to go do this on my turn. Your turn. What are you going to do about it? And then they kind of do the same thing. There's like very limited exceptions to that where like, there are like a counter spell where like you can stop a spell from happening, but like you have to play it on your turn and they have to play something in order to trigger it. Like things like that. And I would feel like Hearthstone is also kind of at least a more simplistic game for new players especially. Like you can only play on your turn. You only get a mana on your turn each turn that it is. And you're limited in your deck building to two things. Either your class cards, which are all based off of like the World of Warcraft classes like Paladin, Priest, Hunter, etc., and the neutral cards, which every class can play with, but some just don't utilize others as well as maybe another class. There was a 1/1 beast with like charge, which means that it could attack right away. It's not going probably in a priest deck because priests don't really care about being aggressive. They're more of a control class. But a hunter might because they have synergy with other beast cards. They have a much more aggressive play style in that case. And it's a lot easier. Like even like if you look at your hero when you're first starting, it's like you see what their power is and you're like, oh, so like Hunter deals 2 damage to the other player. So I'm just going to be aggressive. That's really where it boils down to is it's like it gives really good design to help you understand what you're getting into. And I think that's part of the reason like Hearthstone might have like a really good setup with it. It's simple enough to get into, but it's still a very like elaborate game because it's like you're kind of in this like chess mentality of like you're trying to think a few steps ahead of what your opponent's going to do. So it's like, oh, he's going to probably, if he's playing this deck, he probably knows this is probably what our next plays are. And then I have to respond accordingly to getting rid of those until one of us doesn't have as many cards to play, and then we're basically kind of hoping for the best. I genuinely enjoy it a lot. I think it's just a matter of what people are willing to put into it. But I definitely don't think it's like a bad circumstance by any stretch. I do think it's warranted also with like the amount of players that it gets. Like the fact that it's still that many players after how many years? Love it. Like, I don't play it nearly as much, but, like, I'm happy that it's still being successful.
I don't know how much you can say that for the next game you have on the list here.
Yeah, this one kind of hurts me personally. I used to be a very big Legends of Runeterra player back in the day, which was, it was Riot Games' digital card game that they made. When it came out, there were a lot of people that were stoked about it. But then at one point or another, something happened where, like, there was this whole shift in how they were handling the team because it wasn't performing well enough financially. And when I was looking up trying to find numbers on this, there was a state of the game update that kind of talked about what they were going to do moving forward. They announced that they were going to focus more on PvE content. So they were doing this whole like Path of Champions thing. And that was going to be their focal point. So we're not even really focusing on the player base anymore that are wanting to play competitively. They also had like a reduction into a smaller team, which did definitely hurt them. And there was a quote in there that I put on here that said, struggled over the years to find its footing as a business. And that part really was the one that hurt. Because what was great about Runeterra when I was playing it regularly was the accessibility. They gave you free cards every week, and the more you played, the better your rewards would get for the free stuff. So you could get like some really nice cards, or you could even just get some commons, and it adds to your collection. You didn't feel like you had to be forced into like playing a bunch of or paying for a bunch of cards kind of thing, and you'd still get stuff like.
Yeah, that sounds like money to me, so to speak. You know, I want that stuff.
But the problem is that they weren't making money off of it because in a lot of the cases, like take Hearthstone, for example. Hearthstone, you have to buy packs, whether it's with the in-game currency or with real money, and there is not as much of a return on investment when, like, say you have a duplicate of something. You would enchant it for dust. When you did that for Runeterra, you didn't ever get more than the duplicate that you already had. So, like, a play set of cards would normally be 3. So Runeterra would give you 3 cards and, like, okay, you've completed your collection. and then it would essentially auto disenchant for you into the in-game currency for you for your extras, which was great. And then you could use those to funnel in cards that you're missing. But then at a certain point, it's like, if you're giving all these cards away for free, you're not making money still. So they had to
Right.
they had to try to make it up in like cosmetics essentially, which, it's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just, I think that maybe part of the problem was just kind of like the financial system that they had in mind with all of it. And that's where I think a lot of the problem went down, where it was like, oh, we'll give you wild cards so you can get all these champions or epics or rares or commons that you need. And if I have all these wild cards, well, I'm just going to make the cards that I need for the deck, and then, that's kind of it. At the time when I stopped playing, I had a full collection. And I don't think I spent any money. If I did, it was very minimal.
So in a quest to be very pro player, it basically hurt their business, which is a very sad state of affairs.
Which is ironic because like the next game that we're going to be talking about kind of does the same thing, and yet they're seeing more success in it. But we'll get to that in a second here. But like the last thing of numbers that I could find, because like I went on those sites that I had mentioned earlier, I couldn't find anything. Like nobody had numbers for it. So
wow.
I was able to find an article that said that they had 600,000 active players at one point worldwide as of April 2023. So this isn't even 2 years ago, before the change up in what would have been January of last year.
Right, so they haven't changed the thing. In theory, it should be still the way people like it, and yet they still have a huge drop compared to their contemporaries.
And I think the problem boils down to just the fact that it wasn't making money where it needed to. Like Hearthstone makes money in packs. And yeah, you can still make them in like cosmetics, but they were buying packs for players were buying packs regularly to try to pull something that they needed, and even if they were able to not get that, they would still disenchant the stuff and eventually get the card that they're looking for probably. That said, is Runeterra had such a return on so much of those duplicates to the point that it effectively was like, oh, well, we don't really need to spend money. We are able to just build the decks that we need to because we got all this for free effectively. And then you're still organically getting cards too on top of it all. So, like, really was there a point to spend money? Like, aside from cosmetics and the battle passes that they had? Not really.
Having such a good in-game economy hurt the real, like, business side.
Right, and I'm sure Riot lost a good chunk of money on it, despite the fact that it was, like, I would argue Runeterra had the best system for it all, because it was the most player-friendly, but because it was so player-friendly, it led to their own, like, downsizing in a way. And what's interesting moving forward is that they do also plan to have a physical card game coming out soon. Riot decided that they're going to make a physical trading card game, despite that they have a digital one. And from the trailer that I saw, it looks like it's reusing a lot of older assets from Runeterra, which I'm just like, that's just sad. It's like, it's really just reskinning the horse and trying to make money elsewhere on it. And I'm like, you might as well just, push Runeterra more if that was the case, because it's like, you almost did it out of order in a way.
Right. I think there's something to be said for, like, if the game were being successful and people really loved it, doing that would be like, whoa, there's going to be a physical version of the game. And, like, that comes across as cool. This kind of comes across, like you said, it's like, we're trying to figure out how to make money off of this, so let's do a physical version of the game?
Well, and physical cards means that they can physically sell them, and I think that's where their logic is on this one. And it does play...
And you don't get the free cards.
Right.
You have to buy cards.
And from what I understand, it plays differently than Runeterra does, so it's not quite a one-for-one of what the game is. It's not like they're completely skinning the dead horse and then selling it as a live one kind of thing. They're making a new game, they're just reusing old assets.
Yeah, well, and who knows, maybe that is what they need to do, because maybe you'll get the physical card game players to pick it up and be like, oh yeah, this is really cool, and then they'll go to the digital. So who knows, it could work for all we know.
So, and then the last two are going to be a little bit shorter talking points, but like Marvel Snap is a fairly newer one on this list. It's still popular, but the numbers that I found make it feel very limiting, and I think part of that is because I think it's primarily Steam. Maybe there's more players than what I found, because I looked up the active players, and it's roughly about 30,000 in the last 30 days according to Steam charts for them, and it was in addition to an all-time peak player count of like about 19,000 in like August of 2022. So like even like at their top, it didn't feel like it was doing as well as it should have, which is sad because like the guy who spearheaded that whole thing is quite literally the ex Hearthstone like director.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seems really low because I mean, there's that, right? I knew there was some connection to like another big game with like the people who made it, but also, I mean, it's Marvel, and Marvel, I don't think I need to tell people how big of a thing it is in the 2020s. Although I guess you could argue it's been kind of on a decline for a little bit, but that's beside the point.
And then on the other side of it, we have Pokemon TCG Pocket that came out, and I haven't seen a huge amount of stuff talked about it, but like as of November 8th, there was 30 million downloads for that game, and it earned over $12 million in less than 10 days. It's popular. Like, there's no denying that.
Right, but how much of that is just, well, it's Pokemon.
Yeah. And I think part of it is because of the fact that it's like, it's a very watered down version of like the actual TCG, but that doesn't make it a bad thing. It's kind of its own entity in that way, but it works. And I think that's...
You need your quick trading card game fix, so you play it.
All right. But yeah, so those are the 5 that I looked into, and there are definitely a lot of things on my end, and we definitely have kind of already touched some of the stuff on my thoughts on everything, but there are a few thoughts here that I do want to kind of bring it around. But like, something that I did want to bring up was like what I think keeps players around for these games. And in a lot of the cases, I came down to like the big one was expansions and new content. Because I think it's like this goldfish mentality with a lot of card games in general. When a certain set gets released, like take Magic for example, it shifts the meta to something new, and that shakeup becomes fun and interesting for players. But then there's a certain point where it kind of caps off because everyone's playing like the same 4 to 5 decks, maybe. And I'm being kind of generous in some cases on that one. But I think with those, it becomes interesting and brings people to come back because it's like maybe people leave for a little bit because the meta's stale or they just don't like playing against the same 3 decks or whatever that they're seeing daily. And they're just kind of like, yeah, screw it. I don't want to be part of that. And then new set comes out, everyone's kind of on equal footing again because now nobody knows what's good and nobody knows what's bad.
Right. I was looking at your list here, and well, I was going to make the argument, it's like, well, why wouldn't it be competition and why isn't it collecting? Because aren't those the main mechanics? But when you put it like that, the realization came to me, and it's like, this is so, like, duh, of course this is the case. All the other aspects here are kind of
they're smaller by
they're downstream,
but yeah, it's like the new stuff.
Well, I'm just saying you don't get those without expansions because otherwise you're just stuck. You're just stuck with what the original is, and then it's like, well, yeah, then I finish the collection, and then I'm done, and then we know what the meta is, and then that's just what the competition is. So keeping those, those expansions result in updates to cards, result in competing because we have to figure out what is the best stuff. Collecting, there's literally more cards to get, so it's downstream of the expansions and the new content.
Right, and like another thing that kind of ties in with the expansions thing is updates to cards, especially in like a collector game that's online specifically. That really can make or break the same things, because like Hearthstone's the best example out of the stuff I have listed, because Hearthstone, because it's a digital only card game, has the ability to be like, okay, we're gonna do some tweaking on some of these cards that are kind of oppressive or cards that are really too strong, they need to kind of be dialed back a little bit. And it may make them unplayable. It may make them more balanced. It may make them really not change too much. It can happen. Kind of going back to what I was saying, there was a set in Hearthstone that actually almost kind of killed it for him. There was a card or 2 cards that effectively, like, when they came out onto the field, anytime the opponent drew a card, it increased the mana cost of that card. And it was permanent. It wasn't like this is only for this turn. It was, no, this 5 cost card is now 6. And if you're wanting to play that on turn 5 because you just drew into it, but because that's out there, you've now lost your turn. And it can really absolutely screw over a strategy. It became too oppressive to the point nobody wanted to play against them because everybody was playing those cards in almost every deck because it slowed the game down significantly to almost an unhealthy level. And that's probably the best case of a buff that was needed, or a nerf that was needed, so the game could feel like it could actually breathe again, and it was actually able to change some stuff up with it. But kind of going into a couple of the other ones that I listed, it's like cosmetics, collecting, that comes down to personal preference on players, I think, or it's like, Maybe they only want to collect a certain types of things, like both cosmetics and card wise. And then competition kind of ties into what I had mentioned about expansions and updates. It's like if people want to compete with these, they want to be able to feel like they have a shot. Take Magic, for example. It's different for a person who just bought like a pre-constructed like deck to come in and then face off against a guy who spent like $1,500 on his deck. The difference becomes unnecessary at a certain point because it's like these are two different play groups at this point, and we're putting them against each other like they're going to always find a way to win. It's not saying the pre-con can't win, but it's going to be heavily unlikely because this other dude probably fine-tuned his thing and bought all the really good cards that he needed to make this deck a success. Whereas this guy probably spent like 30, $40 to make a deck on his own, or he bought one straight from the game store that was not optimized in like the healthiest way because they're not designed to be a straight competitive deck, you know?
Well, and let's not downplay the aspect of experience too. The person who's got that really good deck probably knows what they're doing with it. The person who, like you said, just went to the store is like, yeah, I was thinking about trying this out. Let me just buy this big box. How many times have they played it? How long have they been into this to figure out, okay, that I need this and I need this so that I can be like balanced, or like I'm really emphasizing this aspect that will be powerful to my advantage. Like, that comes into it as well.
Right. And I think the big thing too is like I literally just had this not that long ago, but there was a guy who was at a local game store that I go to frequently, and he just bought his first commander deck from Magic, which is essentially a singleton format where every card is a one of, and it's a 100 card deck with the exception of basic land cards. And it was a Fallout deck, like the franchise or the video game franchise. And it's Dogmeat is the commander. It's a really good precon for a lot of people who are new. The guy just picked it up because he saw Fallout and was like, "Oh, I like Dogmeat."
Mm-hmm.
He has never played Magic, but he literally saw Dogmeat and Kaisar and Madison Lee and the Wise Mothman and all these Fallout characters that they put in on Magic cards, and he just bought a deck and he was content. Is it meaning he's going to win a lot of games? No, he's literally just getting into the game. But like everybody who was in there, myself included, we were all happy to talk to him about like, there's good resources that are out there. Like if you want to build that deck better, like I told him a couple of websites that I know that like they give you like, here's what other people are building with that deck as like their commander. He was excited. Nobody was like trying to make him feel bad about like being new. It was like, no, we love the Magic community. We want people to come back over and over again. Like my girlfriend, it was the same thing. I got her in with a dinosaur deck because I knew she loved dinosaurs. And now she has that dinosaur deck running at such a smooth rate. I have lost like 80% of my games with her. And I wish that was a joke. That woman has clocked me multiple times with nothing but dinosaurs. And I sit there and I'm like, I have made it too strong, and I'm kind of mad at myself because I really wanted this deck for myself, but I loved her too much. So I gave her the deck, and you know what? I'm just happy she's enjoying the game.
See, in some ways, it's funny that you say that, because I think you're kind of getting then to the inverse of what we talked about at the start of this conversation, at least with the digital version of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
right.
You're right, she would have picked it up if it weren't dinosaurs, but now she wants it. Your friend wouldn't have picked it up if it weren't Fallout, but now he's into it in a very similar way. Like,
right.
There's a game that
Magic's got this like,
they've
got a real good thing going with like these Universe Beyond sets that they came out with, where they're like introducing IPs that exist already and putting them into Magic, like that are separate from like their main story. Like they've recently come out with, like I said, Fallout. They have Warhammer 40K. They had Assassin's Creed. They have Final Fantasy coming up here like later this year. They're getting people to come in from other walks of life into their game because there's characters they recognize.
Yep.
And they want to see what this is all about.
Yep. And in a very similar way, there's this board game making company. I would think it's pronounced as Come On. It's CMON, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like one of their, I mean, granted, both of these are licensed, I suppose, but like one of their little sub-series is this Mayhem sub-series. But one of them is, like one of the like versions of it is a Looney Tunes set. I love old Looney Tunes. I would love to have a board game that's like that. Would I pick it up any other way? No, the only other one they have is Teen Titans Go, and I don't care about that, so I'm not going to play it. But now, it's like they've hooked me in. They made a Scooby-Doo board game. Am I necessarily going to pick up some of the other games that they have? Not necessarily, but I'm definitely more persuaded by the fact that they've got, at least some other stuff that's hooking me in. So it's like, well, then maybe I'll reconsider. It's like, oh, I got into this because I like Scooby-Doo. Oh, but the game is fun. Maybe other games they do are fun too. And then I'm going to play more of their stuff. It's the same thing here. Oh, I like Fallout. Oh, but the game itself is really fun and I enjoy it and it makes sense. Maybe I should try some of these other ones that are a little bit more generic or in some other way that I'm interested in them.
Right. To kind of hopefully wrap this up pretty soon. I already kind of went through a lot of my thoughts on the games. Like, I don't think we got to go through that. It does have a question on here that you have, though.
Yeah, that was the only other thing I was wondering about with like keeping players around, because obviously there's a lot of fluctuation. I was wondering how frequency plays into it, because I would think like if we kind of established expansions and new content is downstream of the other things, I would think it's like you'd want these to be relatively constant as opposed to like, we're going to make an update once a year. It'll be a big update, but it's once a year. It's almost like I'd rather have a smaller update, but it changes a good amount of stuff. So it's like, all right, well, now I got to try it again.
Right. And I think the frequency question can kind of go in like both sides. It's like if you kind of do what some of them have probably done in the past, you have expansions that like are so few and far between to the point of like, well, I'm bored of what's going on until this actually comes out. I don't really want to play. Versus, and Magic specifically is a very big one that is at fault here on this. There's sometimes an over frequency of things because it feels like you don't get enough time to breathe.
You don't have an opportunity to maybe get used to like, oh, this is like this now.
So just off of the 2024 year for Magic, in stuff that they all got, this is the following things that they had. And I'm going to strictly only do sets. There was Ravnica Remastered, which was essentially a set that they had a bunch of things for them that are like precursors to older times that they've gone to Ravnica sets, which, cool. They had Murders at Karlov Manor, which released about a month later. So that's 2 sets that we've got there. That is not including a couple weeks later. They had Clue Edition, which was literally Magic, but it was basically the board game Clue.
Okay.
Which actually featured new cards, including the suspects.
Oh my god.
Hey, you laugh. I have a Colonel Mustard deck at the ready when I want to build that.
I like Clue. You're it's like I just said, you're reeling me in. Oh. I want to try the Clue one. Okay, but we're at 3. Okay.
Right. This is February.
Oh, so we've got more expansions.
We have 10 more months.
Right, there are more expansions than there are months that have expired so far. So we're at 3 in 2 months.
So here's the thing: is that the Clue thing was kind of in addition to like the Murders thing. It was kind of like
sure. Okay, those are connected. That makes sense.
But yeah, there were new cards, so I'm going to count it in this. There was then in March, there was Universes Beyond Fallout. There was, let's see, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which released in April.
We're at 5.
We're at 5, yeah. Now, the Fallout stuff was not technically a set. It was like a bunch of pre-constructed decks that all featured Fallout cards. But I'm going to count them because the cards are different. So in that case, yes, I'm going to count those all in there. Now, Thunder Junction also had like a couple of bonus sheets of stuff too, including like old cards that got reprinted, and then there was also the Big Score, which was like even more cards for the set that were like special editions.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm counting that all as Thunder Junction for simplicity on this one. If we really wanted to, we could get into the secret layers because there was a Hatsune Miku secret layer that released. Don't know why, but there was.
That's very random.
I can feel the silence of trying to process how does Hatsune Miku show up.
Well, okay, but like,
Magic?
But I mean, to your point, how does Clue show up? How does Fallout show up? Like when you compare to these, like, so I think the point is, I don't know that we need to go through the whole list unless you just have a round number here. But
I have the full list already pulled in. I'm going straight through this whole thing. You need to understand how much product comes out in a year for these.
Well, people. But I'm just saying the point you're trying to get across here is it's like they're doing too much.
Yes. Yeah, let's see here. We also had Assassin's Creed dropped in June. Modern Horizons 3 dropped, which was another full set. Bloomborough released in August. That was another full set. There was Mystery Booster 2, which was for some reason a set that they brought out. That was like a really weird like exclusivity or like limited set. I don't know how to really describe that one. There's the Dungeons and Dragons 50th anniversary super drop.
Well,
There
that one
is
makes sense. Like they're in the
yes.
same kind of area. If you're into Magic, you're probably into D&D or vice versa. Those go
Yes.
together.
And then we have, let's see here. There is the Duskmourn House of Horror, the one I had mentioned, that released in September. I'm almost there, hang on. The Marvel Super Drop that I had mentioned, that came out a month after Duskmourn, or 2 months after, something like that. And that's it. That was the last stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, and Foundations. That's the one I forgot about. Foundations and Foundations Jumpstart also dropped in November. So you see the problem of having too much content.
Yes, there's kind of a both side, like you said, there's a both sides issue here. There's too much stuff, but also, I mean, so you're getting that like I'm just gonna throw something against the wall and hope it sticks. But maybe you'll get like your friend who's into Fall and now he's more interested in playing more Magic, right?
Right.
So it's like it also has both sides of the benefits too.
So like the thing is that this isn't necessarily a Magic problem. This is more of like upper management above them. Like this is probably more like a Hasbro problem than anything, or a Wizards of the Coast problem, where they don't realize that how much content is being thrown at them that we don't have enough time to like process what we did beforehand. And now we're going already like a month or 2 months later where we're actively having all of these things suddenly. It's like, oh, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on involvement in this, and it's taken a bit off me to really process it.
Right.
I will say the best thing to come out of Magic though was this foundation set that they released back in November. It's a new player friendly set basically. It's massive, there's a lot of cards to it, but it's simplified for players like if like say you were to learn how to play it, it goes through so much of that stuff much easier for people. And at the end of the day, I think that was the most important thing to come out of last year. But I do still agree that we have way too much product coming out from Magic to the point of it's actually kind of drowning us, and it really like forces us to really pick and choose what we're going to be interested in, you know?
Well, right, and that's ironically then at the detriment of them because it's like they're making so much and hoping that just enough people buy it when it's like you could make fewer and then
Right.
have it be more likely that everybody's going to buy it.
Right. So my hope is that when it comes to like these online card games, I hope they all succeed. I really do. I don't know how like Runeterra is going to handle moving forward, like overall. I hope Magic stays as strong as it has been for 30 years. Hearthstone, I'm glad it's on the upswing, and I hope Pokemon still holds up. I hope Snap also does see like kind of an improvement in players. I don't know if when they will, but I don't think any of the ones that we've been talking about are inherently bad, and I hope that they do succeed in some shape or form. Like, I want these card games to be available for the long haul. Because the last thing I want to see is, like, this is the last day that you're going to be able to play it before servers go down. And then I just feel like a part of me is lost, you know? Like, that's how I'm going to feel like whenever the Runeterra servers get shut down. Because,
Right.
like, there's so many memories to that game that I have. Like, they're not going to keep those servers up forever, though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's a good sentiment to end that on. At the end of the day, you just want to see people having fun, that the game that they love gets to continue in some way, because that's really the danger of these being online too, is they can just be taken away on a whim, or at least just like, oh, this isn't working, so now we can't have it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, not to be a stickler at the very end, but I think that's all I have on the topic right now.
Indeed, I think we've covered what we had to say today. If we just somehow found a way to go for 10 more minutes, we would have a new longest episode, but I am perfectly okay cutting it. I think that's the one thing we got to figure out. We're only 3 episodes in, but it's like, I think we need to figure out how to like rein in some of the things we go on a little bit long. But, there's a reason.
We could just have, like, for me at least, like, we need to have, like, a way to remotely set up a spray bottle for you. So, like, if I go on a tangent, just start spraying. It's like, Boom.
Well,
boom,
well,
boom,
I mean, there's
boom.
there's nothing wrong with a good tangent though too, because sometimes those end up resulting in a more interesting conversation than what you initially had planned. And I think there was some of that in this, but I agree there is also something to be said for like let's stick to what we said we're going to talk about. But that is what it is.
But hey, but speaking of sticking around, we won't be for very much longer right now because we've got another episode in the books.
Yes.
So, is there anything you would like to say at the very end here, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, you're on the internet and you're listening to a piece of content, which means you are obligated as a listener to do certain things. You could give it a thumbs up, also known as a like. You could leave a comment, and actually, I've forgotten to mention this a handful of times, but on the Spotify version, you can leave comments on too. So not just on YouTube, you can do it on Spotify, but all the other platforms. I mean, you're pretty much screwed. I can't say everything for every other one, but if you want to leave a comment, great. And we're working on the voice message section too. I think I don't know if we've decided if we're for sure yet. We're gonna leave the name as is. We're going to do something different. But, once you get that, that'll be available as well. But if you've got anything, unless you got anything else that you've thought of in the last 30 seconds, I'd say we are ready to sign out.
Here, I'm going to say something here for the next 30 seconds. So, hi, everyone. This is Boom, as per usual. For those who are listening, we do appreciate you taking the time to listen to us ramble about whatever gaming topics we come up with. Ideally, I would love to, start a new chapter with this show with Brandon. And I think the starting spot of that is figuring out a new name. And we've talked about a few options. I don't know if we've fully selected one yet. We definitely need to talk about that at some point. But hey, if you are listening and you have options or ideas that would be good for, this two-player podcast, as it were now, please, by all means, leave us some suggestions. We are definitely open to some ideas. We appreciate you guys taking the time just to listen to us. And I hope that you guys continue to listen with us. I've been having a lot of fun, just even 3 episodes in. And I'm hoping Brandon has the same level of fun that I'm having. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. But I do hope that we can continue to keep entertaining and give you topics. And because this was so weirdly card game focused centric, I would like to propose a little challenge that if we are able to break 500 listens, or I don't know what the stat is for podcasts, but if we can get 500 people to listen to this episode of the podcast, I'm going to bully Brandon into learning Magic.
Well, this is spontaneous. I did not hear about this. I haven't agreed to this challenge, but I suppose the gauntlet has been laid.
It's on the internet now.
I know. So it sounds like I'm gonna have to learn a card game potentially. We'll have to see what happens.
Look, if my girlfriend was able to learn from me, I have full confidence you can learn from me.
Probably.
I have no issue on that. Besides, I would love to have more people to play Magic with. So hopefully we'll be able to get enough people who are interested in there. And I will say if we can get 500 people by, let's say April. If 500 people listen to this episode by April, we will teach Brandon Magic. And we'll probably do an episode on that too, where, we'll talk about his experiences on the learning side of things and my experiences on the teaching side.
Indeed. Well, yeah, you'll need to do some advertising of this episode then, because, sure. I hate to say it, but the amount of plays is pretty low.
We'll say, let's do 500 plays by the end of April. We'll set that as the goal.
All right.
We get it by then. Brandon will learn Magic. We'll talk about it as an episode probably down the line. And we'll kind of go from there. Until then, we're going to keep coming up with random ideas that just kind of flow into our head and current events as, current as we can possibly do. Mm-hmm. The Switch 2 one was probably the most current one that we've had.
Indeed.
But yeah, that's all I have then.
All right. Well, then, with that all said, my name is Brandon, and you are...
And Boom.
And we are signing out. Thanks again for listening, everyone.
Peace.